and gentlemen, the idea of emanation that we tried to explain before the break is almost the same as the idea of evolution. But there is a difference. Both terms are sometimes mixed up, which is quite understandable because they are quite similar. Emanation, so we said, means outflow. What is within the consciousness flows outward. And the word evolution is also derived from a Latin word, ex volvere, which means unwrapping, unfolding, rolling out. So what is coiled up, what is rolled up, is rolled out. Evolution is therefore the bringing forth of what is within. As we said before the break, this is very different from Darwinism, or what nowadays is called evolution, at least in scientific circles. The scientific theory is that by changing the form, changing the genes, the DNA, the character changes too. According to this materialistic view, evolution would merely be that a brick is added to a brick, or that an experience is stopped by another experience, or that variation is super-added on other variations. So it's the idea of the fact that giraffes have long necks is because of the high trees. Yeah, the most suitable giraffes, the ones with the longest necks, survived, the so-called survival of the fittest, and they passed those properties to their offspring. Again, that is not evolution as we see it, from the Theosophical point of view. You rather call it transformism. By changes in the shape, changes in the vehicle, the body, the character of a being would change. It transforms, so to speak, from one form to another form. Evolution, however, the development or the off-wrap is quite different. Evolution means that there is something in a being, it exists already in that being, in the consciousness of that being, and those dormant or latent characteristics flow outward. Actually, it's something we are all familiar with in daily life. Someone turns out to have a talent for something, and that talent was first latent, and later it became active. And it ranges from a football player, of whom you didn't know firstly how much talent he had, to a writer or a musician who has inner talents, but those talents appear only when he is older. Gradually they flow outward. Gradually they will be developed. So you see, there really is a very important difference between the Theosophical view and Darwinism. In one case, new properties come by chance into being, thanks to the circumstances. That's what we call transformism. And in the other case, the Theosophical point of view on evolution, all those attributes or talents or qualities already exist, but they are latent, they sleep, they are not active, and they become progressively active. They are gradually evolved. All those properties, those talents, those abilities are inherently latent within the consciousness of every being. All beings possess the same properties. And now we have to present you again the idea of emanation, of the oversoul, the primordial ground of all beings in a certain hierarchy. All those beings arising from the oversoul, which means all those beings who are attracted to the influence of the oversoul. So all those hierarchies who arise out of the oversoul all those beings have the same universal, the same divine potentials and powers as the oversoul. Just like the rays of the sun are in fact the same as the sun, or just like the fruit of a tree, an acorn or an apple, has in itself exactly the same potentials and capabilities as the tree that produces it. Are you aware of the fact that when you have an acorn in your hand, you have a potential oak tree in your hand, because that acorn can grow into an equally immense tree as the tree that produced it? And how such an acorn becomes an oak tree? By development, by evolution, by evolving the potential and forces inherent in the acorn, by bringing them forth from the inside to the outside. And now we have to mention one more idea, and then you have the whole picture of evolution as Theosophy teaches it. Look, the acorn or an apple or any fruit whatsoever is nothing else than a crystallized point of consciousness in this physical world. So consciousness is behind or is at work behind the acorn or an apple or a human body. Yeah? What I'm saying is that the actual forces and potentials are not in the outer vehicle, whether it be an acorn or a human body, but in the consciousness that is working behind that outer vehicle. Now, evolution is the flowing out, the rolling out, the developing, weaving, as it were, of the potentials and possibilities within the consciousness. And because all those consciousnesses, all those beings, are emanated from the top of the hierarchy, where they belong to, that is the deity or the oversoul of the entire hierarchy, all beings of a hierarchy, therefore, are essentially the same. And they differ only in the extent in which they have developed the inherent powers and forces. So what's the difference between you and a god, or an animal, or a cactus, or a fly? It's a difference in evolution. You as a human being have evolved more, brought more out of your consciousness than, for instance, an animal. And what's the difference between a philosopher who profoundly ponders about the meaning of life, the issues of life, and a superficial man who never thinks further than the salary he earns, which is never enough to fulfill his desires? It's nothing else than a difference in degree of development, so a difference in evolution. Well, if you study both concepts, evolution and emanation, together, then we can say that emanation is the outflow from the source, the oversoul, the parent source. We are, in fact, that source. And evolution means unfolding, development of what? Development of the latent, the unmanifested potencies in our consciousness. That's all. Questions? Everybody can follow me. Well, that's very good. The fact that we are that source is something explained by the idea of the monad. Don't be afraid. Maybe you thought, I finally understand at least something of those difficult teachings, and now he comes with another different word, monad. But that word monad is actually the same as consciousness. So, in essence, limitless consciousness, infinite consciousness. A monad is the center of consciousness, essentially boundless. It is sometimes defined as a circle whose circumference is everywhere, of nowhere, and the center everywhere. Circumference, nowhere, center everywhere. You have to think deeply about it, and still you can fully understand it. Neither do I, because it is almost incomprehensible to us limited beings, and therefore for us a monad is merely an abstraction. Emanation implies that there is an outflow of a monad from a source, but because a monad is actually an abstraction, a center of consciousness which is everywhere, it remains actually in that source, but its ray or beam descends to a more physical sphere. And we use that word descend for lack of a better word. Actually, you should say that the ray streams from the inside to the outside. And in a specific field to sphere, the ray emanated from that monad will feel at home. That sphere corresponds to its character, its ego, its state of development, degree of evolution. That word ego has nothing to do with egoism or selfishness. It simply means I. What the monad has activated within itself is its ego, its character, you may say. So we are human egos, and you have divine egos and animal egos and plant egos and so on. So in a certain domain or sphere where the monad identifies itself with, where its ego belongs to, it forms a vehicle, an instrument, a body. You may use the name you want. In Theosophical literature, that vehicle or that instrument is often called a soul. And that character, as stated, is called an ego. And that gives the picture of a monad, an ego, and a soul. That ego will gain experience in a particular field. And gain experience, it will gain experience by means of the soul, the instrument, the vehicle that it has developed. And thanks to that experience, it awakens certain aspects in the monad. So you have the monad, essentially boundless consciousness. The monad has developed certain aspects within itself, what we call the ego, and the ego makes use of a soul to gain experiences, just like we use our body in order to live on earth and to experience earthy things. Now let's assume that we are talking about a very highly developed monad who has already experienced many times the process of emanation and evolution. This monad belongs to the more advanced, to the leading monads of our universe. We call them in our human language gods. So there is a divine monad. In Theosophy, such monads are called Dayan Chohans, which means Lord of Contemplations, a divinity. Well, that divinity is not almighty, is not omniscient, not omnipotent. No, it can even get more potential out of the monad, which is essentially limitless. So a god, a divine being, grows, evolves, just like a human or an animal, yeah? So by acquiring experience and therefore evolving, a Dayan Chohan, a divine being, emanates the ray of life, of consciousness, to a slightly lower, a slightly less exalted atmosphere or world. And to that atmosphere, a being belongs that is still noble, but a little bit less noble than that first Dayan Chohan. And that being, which is also a growing monad, forms a vehicle, a soul, And so also on this level you have a monad, you have an ego, and you have a soul. Let's call this being a demigod or a dying choan of of slightly lower degree of development. This dying choan will gather experience as well and therefore grow in wisdom and consciousness, and it will transform the stream of consciousness to a slightly lesser God kingdom. And that being, third God, emanates the ray, the stream of consciousness, to an even lower sphere or world, a sphere where another being feels at home, because that sphere corresponds to its character, corresponds to the ego that it is. And that atmosphere is the thinking domain, the world of thoughts. And the being who feels there at home, who belongs by virtue of his character to this sphere, is the human being. That's you and that's me. So do you get the picture? You see a hierarchy of consciousness wherein are locks, just like locks in a river or in a canal, leading the river to lower lands, or a stream of electricity. That's a comparison we often use, wherein are transformers transforming the stream to another voltage range. Does this hierarchy end with man? No, man transforms the stream of life, of consciousness, to a still lower sphere. So you get this idea, hierarchy of life, 10 stages, according to Theosophy, 3 God kingdoms, the kingdoms of the dying Choans, the human family, the human kingdom, the animal kingdom, the vegetable kingdom, minerals, and 3 elemental kingdoms. All those beings, all those different kingdoms of nature are essentially one. They all stem from the top of the hierarchy, the Oversoul, who, by the way, is itself the result of a being that is still higher than it is, yeah? And this ad infinitum, yeah? There is no end. But let's limit ourselves to our hierarchy. All those beings are essentially one. They differ only in the degree of development, the degree of evolution. Just as an acorn and an oak tree, or a baby and an adult, differ only in degree of development. Is this clear? No questions? Yes, please.
How do you know there are 10 kingdoms?
How do I know that? Well, in fact, the only kingdoms we know are the human kingdom, the animal kingdom, the vegetable, and the mineral. Yeah, we know a little bit. The elemental kingdoms, in fact, we use the elementals, but they are not known in science, although they work with them. And the God kingdoms, in fact, every day we live in the patterns, every second we live in the patterns of those gods, but consciously we cannot talk with them. Yeah. So, according to Theosophy, there are 10 of those kingdoms, and if you go to the old scriptures of the Pythagoras and Indian scriptures, you will find also 10 stages of the hierarchy. But in fact, it's not very important. Sometimes the 3 kingdoms, the 3 God kingdoms, are named as just one, or the 3 elemental kingdoms are just one, because the differences is very, very difficult for us to distinguish. But you can say something about those God kingdoms. The nearer an animal lives to the human kingdom, the more contact there is between that animal and humans. For instance, a dog or dolphins, you know, they, in a certain way, they can communicate with humans. But let's say, a fly or a mosquito, well, there's no contact between us, I think. Not really conscious contact. The same with humans. The more you have developed divine qualities in yourself, the nearer you live with the gods. And if you then, for instance, take those highly developed beings like the Buddha or Christ or Krishna or Lao Tse, the contact between them and the gods is more consciously than, for instance, between a normal human being. But you cannot miss one class of this school of life. There are 10 classes. We need them all to form the hierarchy.
They say man is a composite entity. So, as far as I understand, we can recognize all these kingdoms in ourselves.
Exactly.
So if you miss one, you can add one here, or...
Well, the God kingdoms are the divine aspirations we have. The animal kingdom, the desires and the longings we have is the beast in us. Not something negative, because if you control it, the automatic consciousness, you may call it, yeah, you can drive your car and automatically you go to the first and the second march. Yeah. So that's in fact, you've trained your animal nature. The plants, well, I don't have a lot of hair, but once I had it, long ago. But the minerals you find in your body, and so the elemental kingdoms, you cannot think one thought without making use of the elemental kingdoms, because a thought, in fact, is an elemental. So we use them, we need them. That's what you want to say, eh, Jos?
Well, that's how I look at it.
I say so.
Interesting question. Coming then, of course, if we are a composite entity, that means that we are a kind of combination between various monads.
That's the word. Yeah.
Yeah, which is.
Yeah.
So we are not just a human monad. We are different monads, working together, which makes it even more complicated and interesting, perhaps.
Okay.
Could you also say that in a city you can find all this?
In a city? Yeah, why not? I don't get the meaning of your question. Can you explain more what you want to ask?
For instance, the city of Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Could you say you can recognize activity in the human kingdom because they constructed a wailing wall and a wall between the Jewish and the Palestinian population beside it?
Well, to be clear, not one of those kingdoms is evil or good per se. We all need them. So the human kingdom is, in fact, a very necessary stage in the process of evolution. It's not evil, it's not good. The way we make use of the possibilities in our consciousness, the motive, that determines if something is evil or something is good. So you can find in our society, of course, all the activities of those kingdoms, yeah? And in The Hague or in the Netherlands or whatever country you can find humans, and humans will act according to her most defined principles, and then they act like a deity, and sometimes they act more selfishly, and they don't control their animal nature, and then you have other activities, yeah? Okay, how does the process of evolution take place? Let us briefly outline this process, and let's start with the monad from the vegetable kingdom. So not very well developed monad in our view. Actually, we say that a plant or a tree is basically undeveloped. We can hardly imagine how a plant lives. Actually, we should have started at the bottom, elemental kingdom, but it would be more difficult for us to, almost impossible for us to imagine how an elemental lives. So let's take a tree or a plant, and nobody will deny that a vegetable being lives. They respond to the sun, to light, to other beings, such as insects. A lot of the life of plants and trees, however, is unknown to us. A detailed study of a German forester showed, for example, that trees have a certain sense of community. They even help each other on their tree-like way. It seems that sometimes they pour water into other trees which are dry, a form of compassion in the vegetable kingdom. Anyway, they gain experience. And when you gain experience, you learn. And learning means evolution. Certain aspects already present in the consciousness will be activated and gradually and very slowly will manifest themselves. Now, at any given time, a plant or a tree dies. Dying means that the vehicle, the body, is worn out, and the consciousness withdraws to the inner spheres. In this case, the vegetable consciousness withdraws, but almost immediately thereafter, it will manifest itself again. Strictly speaking, we cannot speak of reincarnation, for reincarnation means becoming flesh again, and a plant consciousness has no body of flesh, but the process is, of course, the same. When a plant entity embodies itself, it carries with him the experience of his previous life. Yeah? And it will gather new experiences, it will die, it will born again, and so on and so on. So you can imagine that when this process continues for millions of years, billions of years, the plant monad, that means the monad who passes to the plant kingdom, reach the pinnacle of what can be learned within the vegetable kingdom. And that means all until then latent possibilities and potentials that were to be learned in the world of plants, the vegetable consciousness has learned. It's a perfect plant monad. To put it differently, the entire plant kingdom is one class of the great school of life, which consists of 10 classes. And what can be learned in the class of plants? The monad has learned. He is promoted to the next class, to, in this case, the animal kingdom. Now, the evolution of plants, like the evolution of man and animals, cohere closely with other kingdoms. And for plants, animals, and human beings, this means that our class in the school of life normally, there are exceptions, normally lasts as long as the life of the planet on which we live, planet Earth, lasts. So during about 4 billions of years, and the life of the planet Earth. Old Sanskrit scriptures states that the planet lives for 4,320,000,000 years. So during that period, a monad who passes through the vegetable kingdom has the opportunity to learn everything within the limits of the plant world, to become a perfect vegetable consciousness. Then comes the great holiday. In other words, the planet dies, an overall period of rest follows. But a planet is a living being, and after that rest period, it manifests itself again, and with him all the kingdoms of nature. And the monads who had gone successfully through the vegetable kingdom, successfully, because it's not always the matter, now begin their evolutionary journey as beginning animal monads. It's not that a plant becomes an animal in the sense that the body of a plant is transformed into an animal body, but that the consciousness at some point can use no longer the instrument. It has become too great, too far developed for the vehicle. Yeah? Just like a toddler who has become too large for his sweater and his pants, and then his mother will buy new clothes. You cannot say that the clothes of a toddler become the clothes of a school child. No, the child grows and gets more adequate clothing which suits him better as a child. Or in the same way, the consciousness that first dressed plant clothes has made himself the opportunity to dress an animal body. Yeah? And now those monads get the opportunity to grow, to evolve, developing the potential of animal consciousness, and then they enter the human kingdom, and so on. We're telling you the process very briefly, without any detail, but actually within such life of planet Earth, you can distinguish other major cyclical waves, which can be divided in smaller cycles, in which sub-aspects or sub-aspects of the plant or the animal of the human consciousness are developed. Yeah, but those details we skip. So, not only humans evolve, but also plants and animals and gods and whatnot. Everything that lives is growing, has potential in themselves, in the underlying monad, which is the heart of his being. Thus, an elemental evolves, an unself-conscious God spark, a monad who passes through this first stage of the hierarchy, the base of the entire hierarchy, through numerous stages, numerous phases, eventually becomes a deity. Questions? Okay. Well, the evolution of human beings does not differ from that of animals. Yet, there is a difference, a fundamental difference, and that is that every human being has evolved self-consciousness, which is closely linked to the mind, the capacity to think we humans have developed. Thanks to his mind, man is able to make choices consciously, and rather self-consciously. And because of this ability to choose consciously, a human being does not need to walk the path of what you may call least resistance by learning the hard way, but he may choose self-consciously his goals. And we are talking about self-directed evolution. Look here, a mouse in a laboratory learns also. You see that for instance very well in those tests which we human beings do with mice. We often do the most terrible experiments with our younger brothers, the animals. But they learn different than we humans. For example, you can teach mice to find behind which door is a piece of cheese. It's a so-called trial and error method. Yeah? But a mouse cannot make in advance a plan how he is going to solve the problem, how to figure out behind which door there is a piece of cheese. We, humans, we can make a plan because we have developed self-consciousness. We are able to think, and therefore the human evolution may be a self-directed evolution. Self-directed evolution implies that you can make your own plan, you can formulate your own objectives, making consciously choices, using your free will, and you are therefore able to work for your goals and accomplish them. Look, if we say that humans gain experience, and these experiences enable them to evolve inherent powers, that doesn't mean that we should gather as much experience as possible. We have transcended the stage of the animal consciousness. We do not have to try everything to know whether it is advisable or not to do something. We emphasize this because there are people who claim that you must have experienced everything once, but it is certainly not necessary. You don't need to participate in a war to know that peace is preferable, and you don't need to steal to know that honesty is much better. If you have experienced something, then it is good to reflect on it and draw your conclusions. But experience per se don't make us wiser. Experiencing things doesn't make us grow in consciousness. It's the lesson we learn from that experience, the conclusion we draw from what we have experienced, which make us grow. And that's always a mental or a spiritual issue. It is that lesson, so the mental processing of an experience, which allows us to evoke more light within ourselves. And for that matter, any experience may be useful, but that does not mean, as I just said, that we have to participate in any experience. Now, I just talked about self-directed evolution, but self-directed evolution is not a matter of course. And you know why? Because of our free will. That may sound paradoxical, but using your free will, you may also choose to remain who you are. You may choose to focus on your vehicle, on your personal and selfish characteristics in your consciousness. And to explain this better, we need to clarify another facet of the evolutionary process, and that is the following. If a being wants to gain experience, it must develop a vehicle, an instrument with which it can gain experience. If I want to learn to play the violin or guitar, I need an instrument. Now that instrument or vehicle is built up from the fabric of nature. The vehicle is our body, a body of flesh and blood, but that vehicle is also our personal structure. That part of our consciousness that is focused on the fabric side of nature. You probably know the image of man as soul, as spirit, soul, and body. And you can divide human consciousness in three aspects. The imperishable part, the lasting part, the inner God, the monad, deity. Then you have the soul between the monad and the body. And then there is the carrier, the vehicle, the body. That soul is the consciousness that we have developed. It's the learning part in us. It's our mind. That soul can focus on the spirit side of consciousness. Then its aim is to become more spiritual, more impersonal, but it can also focus on the fabric side. And then it's selfish, personal. Well, the entire lower man must first be built up before the monad can gain experiences in this sphere, learning its lessons and evolve in consciousness. That process of building the vehicle is an evolutionary process as well. It's the evolution of the fabric side of a human being. It's the build-up of the body. And here comes an idea that might be difficult. The evolution or the development of the material side of man, of any being whatsoever, is always accompanied by an involution or a wrapping in of the spirit side of consciousness. So evolution of matter is involution of spirit. Well, let's try to explain that. Now all that a human is, spirit, soul and body, is present in the monad, in the center of consciousness. The monad pours out a stream of life, stream of consciousness, that has a spirit side and a material side. So spirit and matter are therefore essentially one. They only differ in state. Just like liquid water and solid ice and water vapor are essentially one. They differ only in state, but it's the same H2O. Yeah? In the same way, spirit is ethereal matter, fleeting matter, so to speak. For us, invisible substance. And what we call matter is highly condensed or crystallized spirit, just like ice is crystallized water vapor. Now the spirit descends, the spirit involves. That's the process of involution. And that means that the fabric of matter evolves. It is the involving or infolding of spiritual potencies into material vehicles. When you observe the birth of a human child, you will see the same. First, the body is built up. But at any given time, when the vehicle is formed completely, more or less after 21 years, then the spirit can begin or continue to evolve. What is usually accompanied by a wrapping in, a rolling in of matter. That is the reverse process. The evolution of the spirit and the involution of the matter. The human body loses its flexibility, is more ethereal, and finally disappears altogether when man dies. It's the constant process of involution and evolution, building of the body in order to get experience, so that the spirit is able to evolve, so growth of consciousness is cyclic. Now it may be that man is so focused on his vehicle, on his personality, that he is stuck in the physical aspects of his consciousness, which makes him feel separated from others, and there is no spiritual evolution anymore. Why is that not self-directed evolution? Because then a human is indulging in all sorts of instincts which he has developed in the past when he was barely self-conscious, or at least much less self-conscious than he is nowadays. He is stuck in old thinking grooves, which, like a gramophone record, you know, those old ones, those final gramophone may stuck in a groove and always keep repeating the same piece of song. A man has then programmed himself in such a way that he only sees the outer side of life, and he only wants to live for his own selfish pleasures. There is no spiritual evolution whatsoever. Automatically and slavishly, he is stuck in his own personal and selfish thinking grooves. He is hardly self-conscious. Perhaps he's learning too. Perhaps he's also evolving, but by bitter experience, because his selfishness always dumps him into misery. He learns very slowly that he must change his way of thinking to avoid suffering. It is possible to learn because you are facing the consequences of your acts and of your thoughts, and you can decide to change that. Yeah? However, it's always a slow way of learning, and there is a faster way, a much faster way, and that is what we call self-directed evolution. Self-directed evolution. And what do you need? Imagination. Imagination is the key for self-directed evolution. You should imagine how you should live. You should make a mental picture of a society where men live like brothers. We are brothers. Brotherhood is a fact in nature. So make a picture in your mind of how a society looks like when you live according to that idea. You should think and imagine your own principles of life, the ethical principles of life. You should turn into the general ethics of the cosmos. That is possible. Make an image of universal brotherhood and keep that image in your mind and live it. In fact, that is the master key of self-directed evolution. And in our courses, Thinking Differently and Wisdom of Life, those ideas are further developed. And if you want to go faster, and if you want to do it to help your companions, your brothers in society, well, take a look at our leaflet of Thinking Differently, and maybe you can participate in that course, also on Skype. Well, what did I tell you? A monad, an essentially boundless center of consciousness, the monad, the ego, and the soul. There are 10 kingdoms of nature. We talked about the process of evolution. A being gains experiences which after death are brought to the next embodiment. It reaches the end of the possibilities of its kingdom and passes to the next kingdom. Yeah? Such animals become humans, and humans may become gods. By making conscious choices, you can achieve your goals. We talked about the evolution of matter, which is the evolution of spirit. Evolution of spirit, which is the evolution of matter. And spirit is ethereal matter, and matter is ethereal spirit. Are there any questions?
Well, I thought that if I look at the world and I get the thought that everybody has those divine qualities in itself, can you tell us a little bit of what in what way we can help those qualities come out? So because it's an inner process and not to put something in.
Well, it was actually what I said in the end of my talk, imagination. You should imagine your inner qualities. You should look at another window than the window you normally look through. I mean, you have to make a mind picture of the noble properties, the divine properties, the understanding, the compassion, which are an inherent part of your consciousness. So study Theosophy, in fact, is awakening those inner qualities in your consciousness, because if you study well Theosophy, not as a theory, but you try to practice it as well, you see the interconnectedness of all beings, and you see that compassion is in fact the most natural thing in the world. But you should imagine it, yeah? And if you imagine it, you can practice it. So that's the key, I think. In fact, it's very easy. It's very easy to do it. It's not difficult at all.
It's easy if you try.
And of course, if you start today, tomorrow you are not a god, but you're on the way. And in fact, the aim shouldn't be that you develop your own characteristics, but the aim should be, according to Theosophy, that we enable our brothers, other human beings, to follow that same path. And that's compassion. So you should imagine how a society looks like when everybody lives according to those principles. In fact, in our educational system, our schools, we should teach our children from a very early age to do this, to make those images in their minds of how to live according to certain principles, yeah, and of course to practice it, to cooperate with their friends, to help each other with their homework, instead of being the first yourself or being the best yourself. It's in fact the group, the community, which is more important than the individual. So if you try to make that image, and the beautiful thing of Theosophy is that, I think, each teaching is an argument for living the life you should live, because it shows clearly, I think, the Theosophical teachings, that everything is interwoven, is interconnected. So in fact, there is no separateness in nature. Everything belongs to each other, is a part of each other. So what you do reflects always on other beings. And if you have that image in your mind, you should not think of your own aims, your own goals, or your own happiness, but you should think of the happiness of all what lives, all humanity, or even animals and plants, and you name it. Yes?
In fact, it is the same as with your school. That's what you say. You imagine and you have this practice in yourself, your view and your principles. On base of it, you will have this school. And then the process of emanation will flow and start, because everyone who thinks the same way will take his place in this.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the same thing with the imagination of a...
Yeah. What is a righteous society? Yeah? Plato states that if you live according to your inner capabilities, your inner characteristic, and you bring your talents into the society, yeah, then you do what you should do. And if everybody does it, so everybody brings in his talents, then we have a perfect society. And of course, my talents are different than the talents of somebody else, yeah? But that doesn't matter. And somebody has more talents than another, but that doesn't matter as well. If we bring in what we have in our consciousness, then we will grow as a society, and harmoniously. And that image we should we should have in our mind, and we should meditate on it, and we should practice it. And the more you think about it, the how do you say it? The more logic it is. You don't even to think about it, because it's something that became a part of you to practice it in your daily life. Yeah? We all are aware of the fact that of the law of gravity, so we don't put our glass of water in the air because it will fall. We put it on a table. So if we are aware of the fact that brotherhood is a fact in nature, and we meditate on it, and we are not intellectually, but with our deeper consciousness aware of the fact that brotherhood is a fact, then we will practice it without thinking, without doubting, without making choices. Shall I do it or shall I not do it? No, it's a part of us.
Can I say that the imagination that we not create, but I don't know the word, that it's also developing, and then it's also eventually must manifestate? Can I see that?
Yeah.
Because
there's a very famous action. We will show it in our convention as well, and you know that you saw a thought and you gain act, and you saw an act, and then you have a habit, and then you have a character, and then you have a destiny. So if you start with changing your way of thinking, you will have a different character and a different society, because you are part of the society. So it all starts with our thinking habits. So if you think differently, and more according to the universal principles, so in accordance with the fact that brotherhood exists, you will change the society. And even if it's just one thought, it will change already. So there's no reason to be passive, or there's no reason to say, well, it won't help, because everything you do has its influence on the society.
So you must not look at the results, but do that. Just do it. Yeah.
So, compassion, wisdom, keys to a harmonious and healthy world. Next Saturday, you are all very welcome. And also the people who watch on the internet, of course, they are very welcome. Shall we end with the Gayatri of the Vedas? So we're speaking about the golden sun, and the golden sun is the deity, the divinity, the Dain Chowan, the God, give it the name you want, in ourself. It is our self. O thou golden sun of most excellent splendor, illumine our hearts and fill our minds, so that we, recognizing our oneness with the divinity which is the heart of the universe, may see the pathway before our feet and treat it to those distant calls of perfection, stimulated by thine own radiant light.